From the most trusted names in local news, KDPG Sunday Edition.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the KDPG Sunday Edition. I'm Ken Rice. The late University of Pittsburgh historian Donald Goldstein called the Vietnam War arguably the most traumatic experience for the United States in the 20th century. A grim distinction, he added, in a span that included 2 world wars, the assassinations of 2 presidents and the resignation of another, the Great Depression, the Cold War, racial unrest, and the drug and crime waves. For those who fought in Vietnam, it was a life-altering experience. Many of those fortunate enough to survive Vietnam would never want to go back, and yet one man, so severely wounded that the Army assessed him as 40% disabled, recently returned from just that kind of journey. A Purple Heart and Bronze Star recipient, Rocky Bleier overcame combat, operations, and the challenge of rehabilitation to return to the pro football field with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He is one of their legendary greats and author, along with Terry O'Neill, of the book Fighting Back. And now Rocky Bleier has updated his story in a special edition with 2 new chapters by Gene Collier. And last month, Rocky went back to Vietnam with an ESPN crew. This morning, a look at what happened during that trip and why he decided to re-release his book. In a few minutes, we'll be joined by Ben Stahl of the Veterans Leadership Program of Western Pennsylvania. Right now, though, we welcome Rocky Bleier to the KDPG Sunday Edition. David Shribman is away this week. Jerry Micco, Senior Assistant Managing Director of the Post-Gazette News Slide, is also with us. Jerry, nice to have you along. Rocky, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, guys.
It's always great to see you. So something terrible happened to you in Vietnam. You were lucky to survive it, lucky to get out of there alive. A lot of people would never want to return to the place where something like that happened, and yet you did. Why?
Well, because of an opportunity that existed, and ESPN thought it would be a great idea to go back and tell a story and go back to where we actually were under attack and where I got hit specifically. And there's a part of me that kind of wanted to go back, I think, and just kind of finish up and what it was like, or now like, after all these many years. And so, but it was an interesting experience, and I have to tell you that, only because of the fact that when I came back from Vietnam, you know, I came back to a high-profile industry, and that was trying to make the Pittsburgh Steelers, and because of that, I was asked a lot of questions, unlike my fellow veterans who were never asked about their experience, and they came back in a hostile environment. I came back in a questionable environment. What did you feel? How did you feel? What it was like? What was that experience all like? So to some degree, I got to have a catharsis and talk about my feelings, what I thought it was like. And unlike other veterans, they repressed it, came back, went on with their lives, but then had to live with whatever their feelings were and never really come to terms with it. So having this opportunity to go back gave me an opportunity to come back maybe with those feelings that took place 50 years ago.
You have not suffered in the way we have heard so many others have, PTSD, anguish, remembering the horrors that you endured?
Very much so. I've never experienced that, because I think when I came back, and it was at least, okay, fine, I had to think about it. There was 2 things from a psychological point of view. One, I talked about it. I had to come up with answers to questions that were asked by the media. And secondly, there was a certain amount of respect, maybe not for the war, but for the fact that you fought, that other veterans didn't get. And so so I did not think that going back would be a big deal to me emotionally, having to reflect back. So we get this opportunity, we get this chance to go back. And my first thought was this: oh my God, it's changed, it's different. So you go 49 years, things do change. I mean, what we thought, or what was in my mind, the way it had been, no longer exists. And so it's not as if you can go to a specific battlefield or to a beach or whatever it might and say this great conflict took place here. It's all changed. And so it's overgrown jungles and or what were villages are now cities and towns and roadways and commerce, and things are expanding, and generations have gone by. In Vietnam, although is big in our memory, doesn't care over there, over people.
So you were on a mission back in 1968.
69.
69,
so,
excuse me.
Fine, yes.
You were on a mission in 68 to recover the bodies of some of your fallen comrades.
Right.
And you were, in the process of that, you were shot and a grenade exploded and you took a bunch of shrapnel to your lower body.
Right.
On this trip back, were you able to find exactly where those events happened? Were you able to get right there?
We had coordinates, and there was post-combat reports that ESPN were good enough to go through and find, and so we went back to exact spot that the coordinates had said. And
what's there now?
It's still rural, and it's still a rice paddy. Changed some. It took me a while to kind of figure out where we were because it's not the same as it was. Although I finally figured out that this is okay, fine. Where we came out of the wooded area onto this open rice paddy, and where we ran into our into our enemy, so to speak. And so there was a big movement that was going on, unbeknownst to us, that was taking place. NVA 2nd Regiment came down from the north. They wanted to free Hep Duck. This was the area in which we were. And so we were on a mission with the Marines. Were north of us. We were kind of a retaining force. Anyway, B Company, Bravo Company, got in the mix and got hit, and we were then flown out to get them out of their hot spot, carry their dead out, and on the way out, we ran into a machine gun nest, had a firefight, leave the bodies, we're coming back and we'll pick them up, let's get everybody else out of this area. Now 2 days later, that's what our mission was. And so we had just taken a break, move out to this open rice paddy. I was, 8th in line, 5 yards distance between one another. We're moving out. My point man saw movement across the berm of enemy soldiers. In his excitement, hollered that he saw them, and shots broke the stillness. They started to run. He ran, pulling everybody out in the middle of the rice paddy when a machine gun started to level the area. And guys were diving left and right into those rice paddies. That's when I got hit the first time. And then we finally moved back to that wooded area and set up a defensive position, and that's where I got hit the second time with a grenade as they probed our perimeter and got close enough to be able to throw one in. So then we were in a firefight for the rest of the day until another platoon fought its way down and eventually dragged us out of there.
As you stood there a few weeks ago, did you relive every second of that?
Well, that's what we were talking about, you know, so we were talking about that, and so the question was, and the big question was, how do you feel? Given what I had told you before, having gone through all these questions and so on, and I had told them, I said, listen, I probably won't get very emotional about this one because, you know, I've been telling the same story for 49 years and people have been listening to me, so I really don't have any traumatic response or feeling. It wasn't as if somebody died in my arms or but things happen. And so he said, well, how do you feel? How do you feel? And at that moment, I don't know where it came from, all of a sudden, I had this deep emotion that came out of nowhere that as I stood there thinking about what had happened, maybe in context of what I just saw, how it changed, what was it all worth, you know, came floating back, maybe the feelings at that time, and I had this sense of sadness, and I welled up, and I eventually started crying, gathered myself afterwards, and so thinking in my mind, well, I can't come to terms with this. I don't know what this was all about. But it was such an emotional feeling, you know, that as we continued I'm going to have to tell you this, as we continued our discussion, I started not to feel very well, and I all of a sudden became very dehydrated, I thought, but and so we walked back and I said I need to sit down, and I sat down, and I passed out. Well, I scared everybody there, and all of a sudden I came back, and again we got that all taken care of. But it was, you know, it was as I've been thinking about it, and then got a chance when I came back to explain this situation and talk about it, what actually, you know, happened. And maybe from an emotional point of view, and people were saying, it's amazing what the body will tolerate. It's amazing what the body retains from a memory point of view, from a conflict point of view, that you put yourself in that position to relive that time, and all of a sudden you get this emotional feeling coming back. And so for the first time in my life, and from my fellow soldiers, it gave me a kind of sense of feeling of what it is like for our soldiers today, and for those who had served, when they talk about post-traumatic stress, about having that feeling of aloneness, and it can come at any time. It doesn't happen right away. It can be 5 years, 10 years later. Then all of a sudden one day you open the door and you walk out and you step off a cliff. And so it gave me a sense of what they kind of go through at that time. So anyway, we gathered ourselves, but and finished the project as we were there.
Do you think you were dehydrated, or was it just hot, or is it a combination of all the emotion?
I think it was a little
bit of everything.
I don't think I was dehydrated because I was drinking water, and because everybody was warning me and warning everybody else. Well, you got to drink, you got to hydrate yourself. You know, we had a big breakfast, we drank water all the way out. You know, and so we were sitting in, and it wasn't as if we were out for hours in the sun, and we were just out there for a while. And it was 101, but you know, I really think that it was an emotional response, which all of a sudden just took everything out of me.
You know, Jerry, as we sit here, I'm thinking no guest has ever less required an interviewer than Rocky Bleier. For those of you who don't know, you've performed a one-man show to great acclaim. We just need to turn the camera on and say, Rocky, tell us some things, Rocky. That's all that was required. Anyway, it's fascinating to sort of take that journey with you mentally. We're going to take a break and continue here on the KDPG Sunday Edition in a moment with Ben Stahl joining us. He's with the Veterans Leadership Program of Western Pennsylvania. We'll be right back.